In the year 1906, the United States was a nation in transition, a country standing at the edge of modern industrial power while still holding tightly to its agricultural roots and traditions. It was a time when Theodore Roosevelt was president and his progressive spirit was reshaping the identity of the nation. Railroads stretched across the continent, factories in cities were roaring with production, immigrants were arriving by the millions, and the century was only beginning to reveal its promise and its challenges. And within this period of great change, a small yet powerful piece of American heritage was being struck by the U.S. Mint, the 1906 1-cent coin, better known as the Indian Head penny, a coin that would travel through the pockets of farmers, railroad workers, bankers, politicians, shopkeepers, and schoolchildren alike, becoming a silent witness to the unfolding history of a growing empire. This coin was not merely a medium of exchange, it was a reflection of culture, of art, of politics, and of economy, and the 1906 Indian Head penny tells us more than we often realize about the United States during the early years of the 20th century. To understand the 1906 penny, we must first step back and see the world into which it was born. The Indian Head cent had been introduced in 1859, designed by James Barton Longacre, the chief engraver of the U.S. Mint. His design featured Lady Liberty wearing a Native American headdress, an image that combined classical ideals with the uniquely American motif. This artistic choice was both celebrated and criticized, for while it symbolized freedom and national identity, also represented the complex and often tragic relationship between the United States and its native peoples. By 1906, this coin had already circulated for decades, and it had become a familiar companion in everyday commerce, in shops across bustling cities like New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago, and in the small rural communities that dotted the heartland. The year 1906 itself marked important milestones in U.S. history. San Francisco experienced its devastating earthquake, shaking both the ground and the confidence of a nation, but also demonstrating resilience as the city began to rebuild. Almost immediately, this was also the period of Roosevelt Square Deal policies, with emphasis on fairness, conservation, and progressive reforms, including the passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act, both signed into law in 1906. These reforms showed how deeply the government was beginning to intervene in everyday life and commerce, and as a penny passed from hand to hand, it was a reminder of the very markets and exchanges that such reforms sought to regulate. When we look closely at the physical details of the 1906 penny, we see a piece of numismatic art struck in bronze composed of 95% copper, with tin and zinc making up the balance. The obverse proudly displayed the profile of Liberty in a feathered headdress surrounded by the words United States of America, with the date 1906 placed neatly below. The reverse depicted a simple yet dignified oak wreath encircling the denomination 1 cent, crowned by a federal shield at the top. Its diameter measured 19 millimeters, its weight was about 311 grams, and its plain edge made it distinct from other denominations. While simple in appearance, the design carried layers of symbolism. Liberty, wearing a native headdress, suggested the merging of America's ideals with its frontier spirit. The wreath signified strength and unity, while the shield reinforced the authority of the Union. The minting of the 1906 penny took place primarily at two mints, Philadelphia and San Francisco. And this year holds special significance because it was the very first time that the San Francisco Mint struck the Indian Head cent. For coin collectors and historians, this fact alone elevates the 1906 penny to a higher level of interest. The Philadelphia Mint produced millions of these coins, ensuring their wide circulation, but the San Francisco issue with its S mint mark carried a much lower mintage, making it scarcer and more valuable today. This geographical spread of production tells us about the expanding infrastructure of the U.S. Mint and about the economic growth that demanded coins be produced closer to the centers of commerce in the West. The economic role of the penny in 1906 was far greater than it is today. A single cent carried real buying power. A penny could buy a newspaper, a stick of candy, or even contribute meaningfully toward a meal for working-class families. Children often treasured pennies as small treasures, saving them up for toys or sweets, while adults relied on them for exact change in everyday transactions. This made the penny a symbol of thrift and discipline, teaching generations the value of money in an economy that was still rooted in hard labor. Collectors today see the 1906 penny not just as a relic of copper but as a story preserved in metal. Its value depends on condition and mint mark. Circulated examples may fetch only modest sums, but uncirculated coins with sharp details, brilliant luster, and especially those with the San Francisco's mintmark can command high prices at auctions, reaching hundreds or even thousands of dollars in exceptional condition. The grading scale from good to mint state gives us a language to describe these variations, but behind every grade lies the journey of the coin itself. Some may have passed through the hands of soldiers preparing for service, some may have been exchanged during the rebuilding of San Francisco, some may have traveled in the pockets of immigrants stepping into America with dreams of prosperity. Each coin carries a hidden narrative beyond numismatics. The 1906 penny serves as a window into broader culture. American literature was thriving with voices like Mark Twain and Jack London capturing the imagination of readers. Technological progress was evident as the automobile began to make its mark, with Henry Ford preparing to revolutionize transportation. Science was expanding with breakthroughs in medicine and communication. The penny was a quiet observer of these vast changes, never speaking yet always present in the smallest moments of life. To craft a 2-hour story from this coin, we must weave together these threads of art, history, economics, politics, and personal stories. The 1906 Indian Head penny is not just a coin, it is a vessel of American identity struck at a time of reform, expansion, and resilience. Its copper surface reflects the glow of industry, the trials of disaster, and the triumph of progress. It links the struggles of ordinary citizens to the ambitions of a growing nation. When we hold one of these coins today, we are not just holding copper, we are holding history, the weight of 1906 carried in the palm of our hand. And through that weight, we connect ourselves to a moment in time where every penny truly mattered and where the smallest coin could still tell the greatest story. In the world of American numismatics, few coins hold as much fascination, history, and enduring mystery as the 1909 penny. This small copper coin represents a moment of transition in United States coinage, a moment where design, politics, public opinion, and the artistry of a single man all converged to create one of the most iconic coins in American history. The 1909 penny was not simply a replacement for the long-circulating Indian Head cent. It was the beginning of the Lincoln cent series, a coin that remains in production today, and one that carries with it more than a century of American history and cultural meaning. To truly appreciate the 1909 penny, we must first step back into the late 19th century and examine the long reign of the Indian Head cent. The Indian Head design, created by chief engraver James B. Longacre, debuted in 1859 and remained in circulation until 1909. For 50 years, the Indian Head cent was a familiar part of daily life in America. It witnessed the Civil War, the Reconstruction era, the westward expansion, and the rapid industrialization of the United States. But by the early 20th century, the coin was beginning to look outdated. Tastes in art and coinage were shifting toward more modern and symbolic designs, and President Theodore Roosevelt himself had launched what he called his Renaissance of American coinage. Roosevelt believed that US coins should be more beautiful, more artistic, and more inspiring to reflect the dignity of the nation. To achieve this, he encouraged artists outside the mint to redesign American coins, beginning with sculptors such as Augustus St. Gaudens. This movement eventually led to some of the most famous designs in US history, including the St. Gaudens double eagle and the buffalo nickel. Within this artistic and political atmosphere, the penny too was destined for change. Roosevelt and others felt that the Indian Head design, while beloved, had run its course, and it was time for something new. The decision to place Abraham Lincoln on the cent in 1909 was both groundbreaking and deeply symbolic. Never before had a real historical person appeared on circulating US coinage. Up until that point, American coins had carried allegorical images such as Lady Liberty or classical figures representing liberty, justice, or agriculture. The choice of Lincoln marked a bold departure, but it was also fitting. 1909 marks the centennial of Abraham Lincoln's birth, and the nation wanted to honor the president who had guided the Union through the Civil War and ended slavery. The man chosen to design this revolutionary coin was Victor David Brenner, a talented sculptor and engraver. Brenner was born in Lithuania and immigrated to the United States, where his skill with the burin and chisel soon attracted attention. Brenner was particularly admired for his ability to capture realistic portraits in relief, and he had created a celebrated medal of Abraham Lincoln years earlier. This work impressed Roosevelt, and it was Brenner who received the commission to design the new cent. Brenner's design was both simple and powerful. The obverse featured a detailed right-facing bust of Lincoln with the word liberty to the left, the motto, "In God we trust," above, and the date to the right. For the reverse, Brenner created a design dominated by two wheat stalks framing the words 1 cent and United States of America. This wheatier reverse was practical, straightforward, and yet elegant. Brenner also included the national motto E pluribus unum at the top. The design immediately set the Lincoln cent apart as distinctly American, rooted in history yet modern in execution. When the 1909 Lincoln cent was released, it caused a sensation. The public loved it. Lines formed at banks and treasury offices as people scrambled to get their hands on the new coin. The design was praised as a fitting tribute to Abraham Lincoln, but controversy soon followed. Sharp-eyed collectors and members of the public noticed three small initials at the bottom of the reverse VD, the initials of Victor David Brenner. While Brenner had simply signed his work as artists had long done, critics accused him of self-promotion and argued that his initials were too prominent. The backlash grew quickly. Newspapers ran stories complaining about the initials, and officials at the mint eventually ordered their removal. Thus, two varieties of the 1909 penny were created: the 1909 VD with Brenner's initials and the 1909 plain without them. This controversy created one of the most famous rarities in American coin collecting, especially in the case of the 1909 SVD produced at the San Francisco Mint. Only 484,000 of these coins were struck, making them among the lowest mintage Lincoln cents in history. Their scarcity, combined with the historical importance of the design change, elevated the 1909 SVD to legendary status among collectors. Even today, it is considered a key date in the Lincoln cent series and a prize for any collection. The Philadelphia Mint also produced millions of 1909 cents, both with and without the VD initials. While the Philadelphia issues are far more common, they too remain highly collectible, especially in uncirculated condition and in particular with original mint red color preservation. The historical significance of the 1909 penny goes beyond its varieties. This coin marked the beginning of the longest-running coin design in United States history. More than a century later, Lincoln still appears on the cent, though the reverse has changed several times. The 1909 penny also symbolizes the blending of art history and national identity. Its release reflected a broader cultural shift toward honoring real American heroes on coinage, something that would later expand to include presidents, founding fathers, and influential figures in science and civil rights. But to fully appreciate the 1909 penny, we must also explore the economic context of the time. In 1909, the cent still had significant purchasing power. It could buy a newspaper, a stick of candy, or a portion of produce. Wages were low by modern standards, and a single penny carried weight in daily transactions. The Lincoln cent thus became a constant companion in the pockets of ordinary Americans, shaping their sense of money and value. As the coin circulated throughout the early 20th century, it gained a familiarity and warmth that made it beloved. Generations of Americans grew up with the wheat penny as it came to be known, and the 1909 issue stood at the very foundation of this tradition. Over the years, collectors began to study every detail of the 1909 cent, from the positioning of the initials to subtle variations. In the strike or die, where the coin became a playground for numismatic research with specialists cataloging varieties, die states, and grading characteristics, this detailed study only deepened the coin's mystique and desirability. The 1909 penny also connects us to the personal story of Victor David Brenner. His initials, though controversial, ensured that his name would be remembered by millions. His design became one of the most enduring works of art in American coinage. His decision to depict Lincoln not in a grand heroic pose, but as a thoughtful human figure was revolutionary. It humanized coinage and set a precedent for future designs that emphasize personality and realism. Today, more than a century later, the 1909 penny continues to inspire fascination. Collectors seek it not only for its rarity, but for the story it tells. It is a story of artistry, controversy, politics, and national identity, all encapsulated in a small copper coin. The survival of high-grade examples, especially of the San Francisco issues, allows us to hold in our hands a piece of history that connects us directly to the era of Roosevelt, Lincoln, and the birth of modern American coinage. And beyond its numismatic importance, the 1909 penny carries an emotional weight. It reminds us of the values of Abraham Lincoln: honesty, perseverance, equality, and unity, values that remain relevant today, just as they were in 1909. In this way, the coin is not merely a collectible, it is a living piece of American heritage, passed down through generations. When we study the 1909 penny, we are not simply examining a coin, we are exploring a turning point in culture, art, and national memory. Humble copper cent that became one of the most enduring symbols of America's numismatic and historical journey. Where history meets hidden treasure today, we will journey deep into the story of the 1-cent coin from the year 1921, a coin that may seem ordinary in size and shape, but one that carries with it a century of economic struggle, political change, cultural shifts, and the enduring spirit of the American people. The year 1921 was not just any year. It stood as a pivotal moment in world history. The First World War had ended only 3 years earlier, and America was standing at the crossroads of transition from a wartime economy to one struggling to stabilize in peace. The Lincoln wheat penny, struck in 1921, came into circulation against this backdrop, and every detail of this small coin connects us to the lives of millions of people living in that era. When we examine the 1921 penny, we are not merely holding copper, we are holding a story that stretches back to Abraham Lincoln himself, chosen to appear on the cent in 1909 to commemorate the centennial of his birth. The Lincoln cent became the first regular issue US coin to feature the portrait of a real historical figure rather than a symbolic image. By 1921, the Lincoln design was already familiar to Americans, but each yearly mintage carries its own unique context. The 1921 coin was struck at both the Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint, though Philadelphia produced the larger number, and the Denver issues marked with the D Mint mark are scarcer and often more sought after. Now, let us consider the material composition. This coin was struck in bronze composed of 95% copper with small amounts of tin and zinc. The copper itself tells us a story because copper in the early 1920s was an essential industrial material in demand across the nation, fueling the growth of electrical wiring, telecommunications, and factory machinery. Yet the US Mint had to balance industrial needs with the need to supply coins for daily commerce. The cent was the workhorse of the economy, used constantly for purchases in local shops, train fares, newspapers, and food. The sheer wear on these coins reflects their role in everyday life. The design itself also deserves attention. Victor David Brenner, the sculptor whose initials VD became a famous topic of controversy in 1909, created the portrait of Lincoln seen on the obverse side. By 1921, the initials had long been restored subtly at the base of Lincoln's shoulder, yet the artistry remained striking. Lincoln is shown in profile facing right, his expression serious, dignified, and resolute, a symbol of unity and honesty, values that resonated deeply with Americans still grappling with the aftermath of war and the challenges of the Roaring Twenties. Just around the corner, the reverse bore 2 wheat stalks framing the denomination 1 cent and the words United States of America, with the motto, pluribus unum above this design element signified prosperity, harvest, and hard work values tied directly to American identity. But the story of the 1921 penny cannot be separated from the events of that year 1921, saw Warren G. Harding take office as the 29th President of the United States, promising a return to normalcy. After the upheaval of World War I, America was recovering from the Spanish flu pandemic, which had ravaged the world just years earlier. The economy experienced a sharp post-war recession known as the Depression of 1920 to 1921. Unemployment rose, businesses closed, yet by late 1921, the seeds of recovery were being planted, and ordinary Americans continued to rely on coins like the humble penny for their day-to-day lives. This economic uncertainty is reflected in the mintages. Philadelphia struck more than 39 million cents in 1921, while Denver struck just over 74 million though. These may sound like large numbers in comparison to other years. Production was modest, a reminder of a nation balancing its financial resources. Collectors today treasure these coins, not only for their age, but for the window they provide into the past. A worn 1921 penny may have once passed through the hands of a soldier returning from France, a farmer buying seed for his field, a child buying candy at a corner store, or a factory worker earning a day's wage. Each circulation mark and scratch tells a story of American life, and when you hold such a coin, you are quite literally touching the past. Numismatists often study variations and striking differences, and while the 1921 cent is not known for dramatic errors, it still has varieties of interest: weak strikes, uneven surfaces, and differences in coloration depending on storage and circulation. Many collectors pursue them in grades from well-worn to mint state, with pristine examples commanding significant premiums. The wheat penny series as a whole represents a rich chapter in numismatic history spanning from 1909 to 1958, and each year reflects its own context. But 1921 holds special significance because it embodies the resilience of America between two great struggles, the Great War and the coming Great Depression. The design endured, the composition endured, and the message of Lincoln's profile endured, reminding the nation of leadership, honesty, and unity at a time when it was most needed. As we move deeper into the details, we find that coinage is never created in isolation, but tied directly to policy and the needs of commerce. The U.S. Mint in 1921 faced not only the task of producing coins, but also navigating the ongoing debate about metal costs. The cent was small in value, yet costly to manufacture relative to its worth. The government had to weigh practicality against tradition. Some even questioned whether the cent should continue to exist. But for ordinary Americans, the penny was indispensable. They used it every single day. In an era when wages were low and every cent truly counted, a penny could buy chewing gum, newspaper, or contribute to a loaf of bread. It was never taken for granted. This coin also reflects the evolution of technology. In minting, presses in 1921 were capable of mass production, but compared to modern standards, they were less precise, which is why we see greater variance in strike quality. Each individual coin carries small differences that add character, and sometimes create collectible varieties for numismatists. Today, coins struck in Denver often show slightly weaker strikes on the reverse, while Philadelphia strikes tend to be more consistent. These subtle differences are what fuel interest among serious collectors who seek the finest examples available. The legacy of the 1921 Lincoln cent continues into the modern age. For collectors, it is a piece to treasure. For historians, it is a primary source object reflecting economics, culture, and politics. For everyday Americans, it is a reminder that value is not only in dollars, but in memory and heritage. When you look at Lincoln's face on this coin, you are reminded of a leader who preserved the Union through its greatest trial, and when you see the wheat ears on the back, you are reminded of the agrarian strength that fed the nation and built its prosperity. The story of the 1921 penny is more than just metal. It is about people. It is about a country striving through hardship and change. And it is about continuity in the symbols that define the United States. from the smallest coin in your pocket to the greatest ideals of liberty and unity. The 1921 wheat penny holds its place in history not as a rare accident or an obscure relic, but as a living piece of America, a coin that whispers to us across the decades, telling us where we came from and reminding us that even the smallest things can carry the greatest meaning. The year was 1936, a pivotal moment in American history and a turning point in the world of coinage and numismatics. When the United States Mint struck the Lincoln wheat penny of 1936, it was not merely another cent leaving the dies of Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. It was a coin that carried the spirit of a nation in transition, a nation balancing between the fading shadows of the Great Depression and the approaching storm clouds of the Second World War. The Lincoln cent, which had first been introduced in 1909 to mark the centennial of Abraham Lincoln's birth, had by this time become a firmly established part of American life, a coin familiar to every pocket, every purse, every cash register, and every child's hand, as they counted their small savings. 1936 Lincoln wheat penny was struck in an era when confidence was slowly returning to the American economy. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal programs were in full swing. Millions of Americans were finding new hope through government projects, and industries were beginning to revive after years of hardship. This optimism carried into the minting of coins as production increased significantly compared to the lowest mintages of the early 1930s. In 1936, more than 379 million pennies were struck across the three mints. Philadelphia struck the largest share. Denver and San Francisco contributed smaller but still significant amounts, and together they ensured that this coin became one of the most widely circulated pieces of small change in the mid-1930s. The design of the 1936 penny carried with it a strong sense of continuity. The obverse, designed by Victor David Brenner in 1909, continued to display the noble portrait of Abraham Lincoln, the first real person ever honored on a United States coin. Brenner's choice of Lincoln was not accidental. It represented honesty, integrity, and resilience, qualities Americans held onto during one of the most trying decades of the 20th century. Around Lincoln's bust, the familiar inscriptions remained: "In God We Trust" at the top, "Liberty" to the left, and the date 1936 to the right. The simplicity of this layout was part of its strength. It reminded every American of the enduring values of faith, liberty, and democracy. On the reverse of the coin, the wheat ears stood tall, framing the inscriptions "1 cent" and "United States of America" at the center, along with the motto "Pluribus Unum." The wheat stalks themselves symbolized growth, agriculture, and sustenance, a reminder of the agrarian roots of America. Even at a time when cities and industries were expanding rapidly, the symbolism of wheat was especially powerful during the 1930s, when the Dust Bowl had devastated farmlands across the Great Plains. Yet here on the humble penny, the wheat still grew strong, suggesting survival and renewal. While collectors view the 1936 penny as a special issue, not only because of its historical context, but also because this was the first year the United States Mint began producing proof coins again. After a two-decade hiatus beginning in 1936, a small number of specially struck proof Lincoln cents were made in Philadelphia. These coins were produced with mirror-like fields and sharp details, and they represented a return to the mint's dedication to artistry and precision. Only a few thousand of these proof pennies were struck, making them highly sought after by numismatists today. The contrast between the mass-produced circulation strikes and the carefully polished proofs demonstrates the dual role of coinage as both everyday tools of commerce and objects of beauty meant for preservation. Looking closer at the mint marks, the Philadelphia mint coins bore no mark, as was traditional. The Denver mint coins carried the small d beneath the date, and the San Francisco mint coins bore the s. These mint marks serve as identifiers that link each coin back to its place of origin, and for collectors this adds layers of interest because mintage numbers and survival rates vary. The Philadelphia issue was struck in enormous numbers, but the San Francisco mint produced fewer, making them scarcer in higher grades. The Denver issue falls in between and within these categories. Condition Rarity and minting anomalies shape value in profound ways. Rares and varieties are another dimension of the 1936 penny's legacy. Among the most famous is the 1936 double die obverse, a striking variety where the inscriptions and the date appear doubled due to a misalignment during the die creation process. These double die cents are rare and highly prized, commanding thousands of dollars at auction. Another interesting variety includes repunched mint marks on Denver and San Francisco issues, where the small d or s was stamped more than once, creating overlapping impressions. Small flaws, like die cracks, off-center strikes, and clipped planchets also exist, and collectors treasure these as windows into the human and mechanical challenges of coin production in the 1930s. Economically, the 1936 penny flexed the purchasing power of the era. A single cent could buy more than it can today. Children could buy a piece of candy or a stick of gum. Newspapers in some cities still sold for a penny or two, and the coin had a psychological weight in people's daily transactions. Saving pennies was not a trivial act during the Depression era. It was a habit of survival. Families often collected pennies in jars to save for essentials, and many young collectors of the time began their numismatic journeys by pulling wheat pennies like the 1936 issue from circulation. The value of a penny in 1936 cannot be measured only in money, must also be measured in the hopes and discipline it represented. Distally, the 1936 penny sits at a crossroads in American coinage. The transition from the hardships of the early 1930s into a more prosperous late decade is captured in its mass mintages, the reintroduction of proofs, and the energy of renewed production. By 1936, the Lincoln cent had been in production for 27 years, and yet its design remained largely unchanged, a testament to its popularity with the public. Critics of Brenner's design existed, but the entrance of the Lincoln wheat cent until 1958 proves its cultural staying power. From a collector's perspective, the 1936 penny offers a wide range of values. Common circulated examples can still be found today, worth only a few cents above face value, but in uncirculated condition, especially in red gem grades, these coins can bring significant premiums. Proof examples from 1936, especially those with flawless surfaces, can sell for thousands of dollars at major auctions, and rare double die or repunched mintmark varieties can elevate the coin to the centerpiece of a collection. The dual reality of the 1936 penny is fascinating. It is both a common everyday coin and, in certain forms, an extremely valuable rarity. This duality captures the essence of coin collecting itself, where history, rarity, condition, and demand intersect when telling the story of the 1936 penny. One must also place it in the broader context of American life. Franklin Roosevelt had just been re-elected in 1936. In one of the greatest landslides in presidential history, America was embracing social reforms and labor protections. Hollywood was booming, with stars like Shirley Temple and Clark Gable dominating screens. Swing music filled the airwaves. Jesse Owens had just stunned the world at the Berlin Olympics, demonstrating American strength and resilience in the face of Nazi propaganda. All of these events were happening while the humble penny circulated in the hands of Americans young and old. The coin was both silent witness and participant in daily life. It paid for movie tickets, newspapers, candy, trolley rides, and countless small exchanges. Each 1936 penny has lived a journey unique to its time, touched by hands that built the modern nation. This way, the 1936 Lincoln wheat penny is more than copper, and more than 1 cent, is a living relic of history. It tells the story of America's recovery from hardship, its respect for enduring symbols like Lincoln, and its faith in progress. It tells of artistry returning to the mint with proof coinage. It speaks of errors that reveal the imperfections of human industry, and it reminds us that even the smallest unit of money carries immeasurable stories for collectors and historians alike. The 1936 penny is not just an object to be stored in an album or displayed in a case. It is a piece of the American experience, a chapter in the story of the nation written in copper. In the early decades of the 20th century, when America was still recovering from the aftermath of World War I and moving rapidly into the Roaring Twenties, the story of the 1921 1-cent coin, also known as the Lincoln wheat penny, begins to unfold. This was not just a small copper piece of money that people carried in their pockets. It was a reflection of the economic struggles, political changes, industrial growth, and cultural shifts that shaped the lives of millions of Americans. At the time when Abraham Lincoln was first placed on the penny in 1909, to commemorate the centennial of his birth, it marked a turning point in American numismatics, because it was the first time a real historical figure had been permanently featured on a United States coin. Before that, coins bore symbols of liberty, allegorical figures, and patriotic designs, but never an actual president, and by 1921, that design was still young, but already deeply embedded in the American psyche. The 1921 penny may seem common and small in value today, but its history is rich and layered. When we examine the events of the early 1920s, we see a nation grappling with major transitions. The war had left scars on families who had lost loved ones. Inflation had spiked in the years immediately after the war, and then a severe recession hit in 1920 to 1921, which caused widespread unemployment, wage cuts, and strikes. All of this created a context in which every coin mattered. Every penny could mean the difference between hunger and survival for struggling families, and the penny of 1921 circulated through countless hands, from factory workers to farmers, from students to businessmen. The coin itself was made of bronze, composed primarily of copper with a small mix of tin and zinc, giving it that warm reddish-brown tone. Collectors today know that the 1921 penny was struck at two different mints, Philadelphia and San Francisco. The Philadelphia issues bore no mint mark, while the San Francisco coins carried the small S beneath the date, and this detail, while small, makes a massive difference in rarity, desirability, and value in the world of coin collecting. The 1921 Philadelphia cent had a decent mintage in the tens of millions, which means it was widely available in circulation, but the 1921's Lincoln penny had a much lower mintage, making it far scarcer and highly sought after by collectors. This scarcity has elevated the San Francisco issue into one of the key coins of the wheat penny series, and one that collectors often struggle to acquire in high grades. But to truly understand why the 1921 penny holds such importance, we must not only look at mintage numbers and survival rates, we must also dive into the story of America in 1921. The nation was entering the Jazz Age. Prohibition had been enacted in 1920, changing social behaviors and fueling the rise of organized crime. Women had just secured the right to vote with the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920, shifting the political landscape forever. Radios were beginning to bring music, news, and entertainment into homes, revolutionizing communication, and automobiles, led by Henry Ford's Model T, were transforming transportation and reshaping cities and towns. Amid all this change, the humble penny carried the portrait of Abraham Lincoln, whose legacy of leadership, unity, and emancipation served as a reminder of America's enduring ideals. Lincoln's face on the penny was not simply decoration, it was a daily symbol of resilience and aspiration, as millions of Americans handled the coin, whether they were buying a loaf of bread, saving pennies in jars, or giving them to children as allowance money. The design of the 1921 penny features Victor David Brenner's iconic portrait of Lincoln on the obverse. The profile is strong, serious, and dignified, representing honesty and strength. Above the date is the motto, "In God We Trust." To the left of Lincoln, the word liberty, and on the reverse we see two wheat stalks framing the denomination 1 cent, and the words United States of America, with the Latin phrase E pluribus unum at the top. This reverse design gave the coin its popular nickname, the wheat penny, symbolizing both the agrarian roots of the nation and the idea of prosperity. The coin circulated heavily throughout the 1920s, and many examples became worn down, almost smooth, from decades of use, which is why finding a sharp, well-preserved example today is so prized for collectors. In terms of numismatic value, the 1921 penny presents fascinating layers of rarity and condition. When found in well-circulated condition, the coin might only be worth a small premium over face value, but in higher grades with crisp detail and original red luster. Prices can rise dramatically, especially for the 1921's issues where mintages were only about 15 million compared to over 39 million at Philadelphia. This makes the San Francisco cent one of the semi-keys in the entire wheat penny series. Collectors often compare it to other tough dates like the 1909 SVD or the 1914D, and while it is not quite as rare, it is an essential piece to completing a wheat penny set. Beyond rarity, though, the 1921 penny is also a portal into the daily lives of ordinary Americans. Think of a coal miner in West Virginia earning a few dollars a day, or a farmer in Kansas selling produce at the market. Each penny mattered. Children might have collected these pennies in piggy banks to buy candy or toys, and during tough times families might have hoarded jars of coins for emergencies. When the Great Depression struck less than a decade later, many of these 1921 cents were still in circulation, carrying with them the story of survival and thrift. This penny thus serves not only as a collector's item, but also as a historical witness to the rise and fall of fortunes during the early 20th century. When you hold one in your hand, you hold a piece of the Jazz Age, the struggle, the post-war years, and the optimism of a country on the edge of modernity. The artistry of Brenner's design, the significance of Lincoln's portrait, and the circumstances of the year 1921 combine to make this coin far more than a small copper disc. It is a symbol of history, economics, culture, and perseverance. And when we follow its story in detail from the minting process to circulation patterns, from scarcity to collector markets, we find a narrative that is deep enough to fill hours of discussion about the past and its connection to the present. This is the magic of coin history, and it is why the 1921 Lincoln wheat penny remains a treasure, not only in monetary terms, but also in the way it captures the essence of an era and carries the enduring spirit of Abraham Lincoln into the hands of every generation that encounters it. In the world of coin collecting and American history, there are few coins as intriguing as the 1965 Lincoln penny, a small copper coin that carries within it the echoes of a transformative time in the United States and in the American monetary system. To fully appreciate the story of this coin, we must travel back not only to the mid-1960s, but to the very origins of the Lincoln cent itself. For the penny has always been more than just a coin, has been a cultural icon, a political statement, and a historical marker that reflected the economic pressures and social realities of each era. When the Lincoln cent was first introduced in 1909, it replaced the Indian head cent, and it was designed to honor the centennial of Abraham Lincoln's birth. The designer Victor David Brenner placed the familiar bust of President Lincoln on the obverse, creating the first circulating American coin to feature the portrait of an actual historical figure. This was a radical departure from the allegorical liberty designs that had dominated US coinage until then, and it set the stage for a century of coins that would increasingly celebrate American leaders and national icons. The reverse bore the wheat ears design, a simple agricultural motif that symbolized prosperity and growth, and this design would remain until 1959, when the reverse was replaced by the Lincoln Memorial under the direction of the Treasury Secretary to mark the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's birth. Now, by the time we arrive at the year 1965, the United States was in the middle of a coinage crisis. Silver was rapidly disappearing from circulation as rising silver prices made it more profitable for the public to hoard coins rather than spend them. The Kennedy half dollars, dimes, and quarters were being pulled from circulation, and Congress authorized a sweeping change in the Coinage Act of 1965, which removed silver from circulating dimes and quarters entirely and reduced the silver content of half dollars. The penny was not made of silver, of course, but it was directly affected by these broader changes, for the coinage system as a whole had to be adjusted to preserve public confidence and ensure that commerce continued without disruption. In 1965, the Lincoln penny was struck in massive numbers to meet demand. It retained its composition of 95% copper and 5% zinc and tin, a formula that had been used since 1864, with only wartime exceptions. Yet the importance of the 1965 penny is not in its metallic content, but in the role it played as part of the mint strategy to restore coins to the American economy during a time of shortage. The Philadelphia Mint struck enormous quantities of 1965 pennies, and notably during this period, the mint suspended the use of mint marks altogether. This was done as part of the policy to discourage coin collecting, which government officials blamed for worsening the coin shortage. Between 1965 and 1967, all pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters were issued without mint marks, meaning that collectors could not set aside coins from specific mints in search of rarity. So when you look at a 1965 Lincoln penny, you will notice that it carries no D for Denver or S for San Francisco, only the plain date of 1965. This makes the coin a fascinating piece of numismatic history because it embodies the tension between public collecting habits and government policy. The design itself remained unchanged from the earlier years of the Lincoln Memorial cent. On the obverse, Lincoln's profile faces right with the inscriptions "In God We Trust, Liberty," and the date. On the reverse, the Lincoln Memorial is shown in fine detail with the tiny but visible statue of Lincoln seated inside, a remarkable miniature within the coin itself. The inscriptions 1 cent and United States of America complete the design, flanked by the motto Pluribus Unum, terms of mintage numbers. The 1965 penny saw over 1 billion struck in Philadelphia alone, which makes it a common coin in absolute terms. But common does not mean unimportant, for every coin tells the story of the era in which it was made, and in 1965, the penny was part of an American economy that was modernizing rapidly, while dealing with inflation, currency reform, and the cultural shifts of the mid-20th century. It circulated in a time of the Vietnam War, civil rights movement, space exploration, and a general transformation of American society. The 1965 penny passed through the hands of workers, soldiers, students, and families. It carried the image of a president who had preserved the Union through its greatest trial at a time when the nation was once again questioning its own values and direction. Collectors today often ask about the value of the 1965 penny, and while most examples remain worth only their face value or slightly more in circulated grades, there are always exceptions. Coins in pristine uncirculated condition, especially those graded high by professional services, can command higher premiums. Furthermore, there are varieties and errors that spark collector interest, such as coins struck off-center double strikes, or those with unusual die flaws. These errors remind us that, even in the age of mass production, every coin can still have its own individuality and uniqueness, which gives collectors the thrill of the hunt. Now, if you want to understand why a 2-cent piece from the 1860s or a 1965 penny matters, you must remember that money is not just about commerce. It is about trust, stability, and continuity. In 1965, when the government decided to eliminate silver from most circulating coins, there was real concern about whether the public would accept this change and continue to use the new clad coinage. The humble penny, though not directly affected by silver, served as a constant. It was the familiar anchor in people's pockets, a reminder of the long tradition of the Lincoln cent stretching back more than half a century. Its copper composition remained steady, and its design had become iconic by then. So even as larger coins changed dramatically, the penny reassured the public that some parts of the system remained stable. It is this symbolic role that gives the 1965 penny a deeper meaning than its simple metal content. For the collector, the 1965 penny invites reflection on a number of questions. What is the relationship between scarcity and value? Why do some common coins remain historically important, even without rarity? How did the mint's decision to suppress mint marks alter the trajectory of coin collecting in the United States? And how do ordinary coins connect us to extraordinary times? When we study the 1965 penny, we are studying not just a coin, but an artifact of American resilience, adaptability, and identity. Imagine holding in your hand a simple copper coin minted in the year 1967, a coin that at first glance seems so ordinary, yet behind its familiar design lies a deep and layered history that connects Britain's monarchy, its economy, its empire, and its people. The 1967 United Kingdom 1 penny coin is more than just a piece of metal, it is a living relic from the final years before Britain decimalized its currency, a symbol of an entire era that was coming to a close and an object that carries with it echoes of centuries of coinage tradition. When you study the 1967 penny, you are not just looking at copper and engravings, you are looking at the story of Queen Elizabeth II's early reign, the fading shadows of the British Empire, and the transition of a nation into a new modern monetary system. This coin was struck during a time of immense social change, the mid to late 1960s, when Britain was redefining itself culturally, politically, and economically. The 1967 penny is especially significant because it represents the last great surge of pre-decimal pennies before the 1971 decimalization, which forever altered the way British currency was measured and exchanged. Millions upon millions were minted in that year, making the 1967 penny one of the most common British coins ever produced. And yet, its very abundance is what makes it historically important, because it tells the story of how Britain prepared its population for the end of a thousand-year-old coinage system. The obverse of the coin proudly features the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, created by sculptor Mary Gillick, a youthful uncrowned portrait of the monarch that symbolized continuity and stability during the first decades of her reign, like later portraits which would show a more mature and formal queen. The 1967 penny captures her in her youthful years, reflecting a country still adjusting to her new leadership after the long reign of her father, King George VI. On the reverse, we find Britannia, the female personification of Britain, seated holding her trident with a shield by her side, a design that had adorned pennies since the reign of Charles II in the 17th century. By 1967, this image had become deeply iconic, yet it was also nearing its end because decimalization would soon sweep away Britannia from everyday coinage. To understand the importance of the 1967 penny, we must go back to the very roots of the British monetary system. The penny itself has a history stretching back over 1,000 years to Anglo-Saxon times, when silver pennies were the backbone of trade and commerce across medieval England. Over the centuries, the penny evolved from silver to copper to bronze, reflecting changes in economics and empire. The 1967 version is struck in bronze, an alloy of copper, tin, and zinc that had been introduced in 1860, when the Royal Mint transitioned from the larger and heavier copper coins to lighter and more durable bronze issues. By the time 1967 arrived, this bronze penny had become one of the most familiar and recognizable coins in circulation, carried daily in the pockets and purses of millions of Britons. But there is also a hidden story about why so many 1967 pennies were struck. More than 650 million were minted, an astonishing figure that makes it one of the most common British coins ever created. The reason is tied to decimalization. Britain was preparing to switch to a new currency system based on the pound, divided into 100 new pence, and the authorities decided to strike enormous quantities of the old pennies to ensure that the public would have enough small change to carry on everyday transactions. During the years leading up to 1971, in fact, the 1967 penny continued to be struck in later years, but always with the frozen date of 1967, meaning that while your coin might say 1967, it could actually have been minted several years later, right up until 1970. This unusual practice makes the 1967 penny unique because it marks both the end of one age and the preparation for another. Collectors and historians often debate the value of the 1967 penny, and while it is true that most examples hold little financial worth because of their sheer abundance, they are priceless in terms of cultural history because they serve as an entry point into understanding British society in the 1960s. When you hold a 1967 penny, you are holding a connection to the working class man buying his daily newspaper, the housewife shopping at the market, the child saving up pennies for sweets or toys. These small coins pass through countless hands, each one carrying stories of everyday life that together weave the fabric of a nation. The design of Britannia itself carries centuries of symbolism, He first appeared on British coinage under the reign of the Roman-inspired Charles II in 1672, and through the centuries, she evolved into a powerful symbol of national identity. By the Victorian era, Britannia was firmly entrenched as a representation of British maritime power, empire, and unity. On the 1967 penny, her trident reflects naval strength. Her shield, emblazoned with the Union Jack, stands for national defense, and her calm-seated figure embodies stability as Britain stood on the edge of great cultural and political transformation in the 1960s. It is fitting that Britannia still grace the penny as a reminder of tradition, as the country prepared to leave that tradition. The Hindi coin also reflects the technical artistry of the Royal Mint during this era. The precision with which each coin was struck, the alloy composition, the weight of 9.4 grams and a diameter of 31 millimeters, all carefully engineered to maintain consistency in a currency system that had existed largely unchanged for over a century. When decimalization came in 1971, these large heavy pennies suddenly felt like relics of a bygone age, their bulkiness and outdated value making them quickly obsolete, yet the memory of their weight and feel remains strong in the minds of those who grew up with them. What makes the 1967 penny particularly fascinating is that it stands as the very last date of the pre-decimal pennies struck for general circulation. Although pennies dated 1970 exist, they were specially struck as proof sets for collectors and never released in everyday use. This means that for the ordinary British citizen, the last penny they would have handled in daily commerce would almost certainly have been dated 1967. Is the final chapter of a thousand-year story of the penny as a working coin in circulation. In exploring the 1967 penny, we uncover more than just the technical details of minting and design. We uncover the mood of Britain in the late 1960s, a nation caught between tradition and change, between empire and modernity, between the old ways of coinage and the streamlined efficiency of decimalization. This small bronze coin is both ordinary and extraordinary. At once ordinary because it was produced in the hundreds of millions, extraordinary because it represents the very end of an ancient system and the dawn of a new Onisa. When you pick up a 1967 penny and examine the youthful portrait of Queen Elizabeth II or the timeless figure of Britannia, you are not just looking at an old coin, you are gazing into history, into a moment of profound transition in British life, into the legacy of centuries of currency evolution, and into the last breath of a coinage system that had shaped Britain for over a millennium. In the world of coins, every piece of metal tells a story, but few coins have carried the weight of change and history in modern Britain quite like the humble 1 penny of 1971. This is not just a coin, it is a marker of transformation, a witness to the most ambitious currency overhaul in British history, and a silent companion in the pockets of millions as Britain left behind centuries of tradition and stepped boldly into a new decimal. Ajith year was 1971, a year that would forever be etched in the memory of the United Kingdom as the nation embarked on one of the most ambitious economic transitions in its long and storied history. For centuries, the British people had lived with a monetary system that traced its roots back to medieval times, a system based on pounds, shillings, and pence, a system that was admired for its heritage but cursed for its complexity. For generations, British schoolchildren had learned the peculiar rules that 12 pennies made a shilling, and 20 shillings made a pound, a system that baffled outsiders and even challenged traders at home, and yet it persisted because tradition in Britain carried weight as heavy as the crown itself. But by the 20th century, change was inevitably as Britain rebuilt itself after the Second World War and embraced modernization. There were growing calls to simplify its currency and to bring it in line with the decimal systems used across much of the world. The voices grew louder in the 1960s as commerce, education, and international trade demanded a system that was logical and easy to use. Thus, the stage was set for Decimal Day, February 15, 1971. The day when Britain would say farewell to the ancient and complicated pounds, shillings, and pence, and welcome the modern decimal system with 100 new pennies in a pound. It was in this grand transition that the 1 penny coin of 1971 was born, and though at first glance it seemed like a modest copper piece with little fanfare, it was in fact a symbol of an entirely new era for British money. The coin was struck in bronze and alloy of copper, tin, and zinc, designed to be durable enough to withstand the daily handling of millions. It measured 32 millimeters in diameter and weighed 3.56 grams. Precise figures carefully planned to align with the decimal system and to ensure a smooth coexistence with coins already familiar to the public. On the obverse, the coin bore the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, a young queen at the time, facing right, with her regal profile designed by Arnold Machen. The portrait was surrounded by the words Elizabeth II de Gratia Regina Fide Defensor, a Latin inscription meaning Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen Defender of the Faith. This was a continuation of a tradition stretching back centuries, yet reimagined for a modern decimal coin. In the reverse, the coin displayed the crown portcullis with chains, a design chosen for its deep historical resonance. The portcullis has long been a heraldic badge of Westminster, representing both the Palace of Westminster and the enduring authority of Parliament. By placing this image on the coin, the Royal Mint sought to emphasize continuity between the old and the new, a reassurance to the British people that while the system had changed, the traditions and institutions of the nation remained intact. The designer of the reverse was Christopher Ironside, whose work on the decimal series left an indelible mark on British numismatics. Launch of the new penny in 1971 was accompanied by a massive educational campaign. The government and the Royal Mint understood that decimalization would not be easy for a population that had spent generations thinking in terms of shillings and farthings. Leaflets, posters, radio broadcasts, and even television programs were used to teach the public how to use the new coins. Children practiced arithmetic in decimals in schools, while shopkeepers displayed conversion charts in their stores. And at the heart of this revolution was the 1 penny coin, a daily reminder that the new system was here to stay in circulation. The 1971 1 penny was among the most common of the new coins, with tens of millions struck by the Royal Mint at Tower Hill, before production later moved to the Llantrisant Mint in South Wales. The Llantrisant facility, known as the Royal Mint's new home, would go on to produce coins for not only the United Kingdom but also countries around the world. The sheer volume of 1971 pennies ensured that they were seen in every corner of the kingdom, from London's bustling streets to the quiet villages of the Scottish Highlands and the Welsh Valley Syatt. Beyond their function as currency, these pennies carried a deeper meaning. They represented progress, they represented adaptation, and they represented a collective national effort to embrace the modern world. For some, they were a source of nostalgia, a link to the excitement and confusion of decimal day. For others, they were simply a coin to spend and forget. But for numismatists and historians, the 1971 penny remains a touchstone, a physical reminder of the most significant monetary reform in modern British history. Over time, the coin itself would undergo changes in composition and design. In the 1990s, the bronze alloy gave way to copper-plated steel as cost saving became necessary for the Royal Mint, but the original 1971 issue holds a special place because it was the inaugural decimal penny, the one that signaled the end of centuries of tradition and the dawn of a new chapter in the story of British money. Its production numbers mean that it is not rare, but its symbolic value is beyond mere collectors today study the 1971 penny with fascination, examining varieties, minting details, and the subtle differences between proof issues and circulation strikes. Proof versions struck with polished dies were included in special sets issued by the Royal Mint to commemorate the birth of decimal currency. These sets have become cherished possessions among collectors, capturing in gleaming bronze the excitement of that pivotal year. Beyond the proof sets, there are stories of people who kept their very first decimal coins tucked away as mementos of the changeover era. For them, the penny is more than currency. It is memory preserved in metal. The impact of decimalization rippled far beyond coinage. It transformed pricing, advertising, and accounting. It reshaped how generations thought about money and arithmetic, and it marked Britain's alignment with the global standard. In this sense, the 1971 penny was not just a coin, it was a catalyst, a small copper piece that carried with it the weight of modernization, the acceptance of change, and the resilience of tradition. When one looks at the coin today, the portrait of a young queen, the proud portcullis, the warm bronze tones, one cannot help but feel connected to that moment in time, the hands that first held it, the shops where it first circulated, the schoolchildren who first used it. In sum, it is a coin that unites personal memory with national history, and for that reason, the 1971 penny remains one of the most significant coins ever minted in Britain. Though modest in size, its story is vast, and though common in mintage, its meaning is priceless. It stands as a reminder that even the smallest of coins can mark the largest of changes, and that, in the history of a nation, sometimes the most ordinary objects tell the most extraordinary stories.